Insist I come into work while nauseous? You got it, sir. I used to be a dispatcher at a transportation company that was forever understaffed. I got some kind of stomach bug and was out for 2 days. On day 3, I called off again, but my manager insisted that I come in. I kept saying, I'm sick and I wouldn't be able to focus and I'd probably be going to the toilet often, but he demanded I come in and at least try to power through the day. I was out of sick days and had no doctor's note, so he threatened to write me up, which would affect my raise later on in the year. I said, I see. Okay, and already knew what I was going to do. So I dragged myself to my car, clocked in, went to my station, an office at the back of a warehouse with 3 or 4 desktops, logged into my computer and immediately puked all over the keyboard and hard drive. I got on the dispatch radio that connects a dozen or so associates. They're like walkie-talkies. Knowing the manager had one too, and said, come in. Come in. Sorry everyone, but you're gonna have to send someone to clean the back office. I vomited all over my workstation. I'll be heading out for the day. I'll send an email. I left without saying anything further. I was only clocked in for 10 minutes, but by law, unless I volunteer to sign a waiver, I have to be paid 4 hours just for showing up. I had a feeling the manager would be too embarrassed to try and bring this up with me, and I was right. I got paid a half a day's wage to barf on hundreds of dollars of company property. My first high school job with a big store, we had a full-timer who did this. Assistant manager insisted he come in, despite the guy running a fever and nauseous. He was also a teen like me, and when he came to work, he looked like death warmed over. At some point he threw up while working register and passed out. AM claimed he was being dramatic, but some customers called 911, and the guy was wheeled away in a gurney, still unconscious. His parents sued, but I am not sure what came of it. Only none of us were allowed to talk to anyone about it, even among ourselves. A coworker came in for a Sunday morning shift. At least she tried to. Usually ID just covered 23 departments in this store for the morning because half of the people scheduled were too hungover and wussy to show up. Coworker was keeping it together until a customer wandered through her department noshing on a fresh and fragrant fast food breakfast sandwich. Pretty much waved it under her nose. Coworker then made a desperate break for the staff toilets. It was about a 20 meters dash, with a half-dozen customers along the course trying to intercept her to ask about whatever. It was like watching a quarterback with the ball heading for the end zone. She dodged left and right past the customers trying to block her. Fortunately she made it. I was doubled over laughing my ass off as the confused customers looked at each other. I explained briefly what they'd just barely missed being a part of and helped them locate the sales they were looking for. When I worked retail, I got the flu over Thanksgiving. We were all required to work the Friday after, aka Black Friday. I tried to explain I had the flu and was vomiting. They didn't believe me and made me come in. So I did, standing at the register. With a pale, sweaty, green complexion, I would ring up a customer or two, then run to the back to puke. Only took 2 or 3 rounds of this for them to give in and send me back home. I got home and passed out in a sunbeam on the floor while petting the cat. You already told them you were sick. You shouldn't have to regurgitate the same info to prove your point. I have a seizure disorder, but I have a seizure response dog who can predict my seizures. I had been sick, but I was told I had to go in that Friday because they couldn't find anyone to cover me. I was at work, and she alerted. I tried to take my meds, but I threw them up. I told them that I had to go home, but they insisted I stay. I guess they didn't actually think I would have a seizure since I'd been there for 7 years and Had never had one at work. My dog is very good at her job. Anyway, there was a lot of back and forth of me explaining that isn't not a thing I can control in them. Saying they can't control the lack of coverage. The discussion was cut short when I had a seizure. My dog broke my fall and flipped me on my side so I didn't choke on my vomit. Which was great, because everyone else was just standing there in shock. In the 3 minutes I was unconscious, they managed to find coverage for me and find a ride home for me. I decided to not renew my contract that year. And for some reason, they were very surprised by my decision to leave. You lived my dream. I have wanted to do this several times. I was so nauseated but could not conjure the chuck. I dreamt of it going all over the manager's bald head, desk, paperwork, and computer. Not going to lie, if I got paid 4 hours for 10 minutes of vandalizing company property on their dime, I'd probably show up to work sick every day. I worked in a bookstore when I was 18. Near the holidays, books were stacked at least 2x as high as me back in receiving. Had a tower of hardback books get knocked over and collapse on my head. I had a raging headache, nausea, blurry vision. Manager wouldn't let me go home. Told me to work register. We were too busy for me to leave. I couldn't even read the denomination of bills people paid me. Yes, we used paper money back then. In the olden days, when we had actual bookstores. Manager went outside on smoke break. I ended up walking out the door and projectile vomiting on his feet. He finally sent me home. I'm pretty sure the manager was convinced that you were not faking it at this point. There was an idiotic handwritten note, in crayon, I'll have you know, at the Wendy's I used to work at. It basically said, there is to be no vomiting while on the clock. If you must throw up, you are expected to clock out and clock back in after you are done. If you cannot throw up on your own time, you can find employment elsewhere. I got paid a half a day's wage to barf on hundreds of dollars of company property. Who among hasn't dreamt of this from time to time? When I worked as a server, I tried to call out with a migraine. Manager on duty told me I had to come in. When I got there, I walked up to the trash can at the end of the expo line and threw up. GM sent me home and told me never come in if I'm sick and to tell any other managers to speak to him if they had a problem with it. Something similar happened to me a few years ago, but with a nasty cold instead of a stomach bug. Was working 2 jobs and could do the first one alright, though progressively lost my voice throughout the day. Second job though, I was a server, which meant handling food, and I don't think most customer would want a server that can barely talk anywhere near their food. It also happened to land on New Year's Eve and day. So the first day I called out of my server job, I could tell the manager was skeptical I was actually sick and not just hungover. Never mind that I was 19 and underage, which I know doesn't exactly stop people, but I don't drink. Even now, because alcohol is disgusting. The second day though, she demanded I show up for work because I couldn't possibly be truly sick and somebody had already called out before me. So I dragged my sorry carcass across the street and settled at one of the countertop seats where my coworker took one look at me and told me to go home, and the one server would handle the shift alone. When I call into work, it sounds like this. Hi, this is Sunflower Speaks. I will not be coming to work today because I am sick. Thank you very much, and I hang up. At my place of work, they have to scramble to find somebody to come in to do my work. And they don't have time to be chatting about why I'm sick. For that I am extremely grateful. I'm imagining a parody of The Exorcist where your manager is repeating, "The power of management compels you," while you're projectile vomiting everywhere. I had a job years ago at a small town YMCA. Loved the work, loved the patrons. Mostly. And was talented at conflict resolution, great at dealing with the public from infants to the elderly. The majority of coworkers were great. This was my first full-time job immediately following my divorce. Moved from Cal back to my hometown so I would have some family support. I was normally very healthy, seldom sick. I got myself a job, a place to live, got my traumatized 8-year-old settled in school, and my budget figured out about 1/4 the income I was accustomed to. Once I got all that into a semblance of order, my new normal, my body apparently decided it was tired of the constant stress, and showed it by catching every single bug out there. Multiple colds, several bouts of various flu strains, both gastro and respiratory, and finally, a monster case of bronchitis that would not relent. Weeks and weeks of constant coughing. My boss decided I was a weenie and needed to learn that she expected me to work while sick. I had done so a lot already. Of course, because I needed money and a job. But no call-out was acceptable to her. In fact, her favorite employee, who she praised all the time for her work ethic, was just out of high school, proud of her perfect attendance record there, and determined to extend her perfect attendance record to her job. She came to work no matter what. Fevers, vomiting, diarrhea, pink eye. She brought them all to the small office where we all shared spaces, shared phones, shared equipment, and our boss pointed to her as the shining example we should all emulate. So, my bronchitis, after several weeks, finally hit critical mass. But my boss was no longer accepting any callouts for any reason for me. A friend watched me cough so much I couldn't breathe, couldn't talk, coughed until I vomited. She told me, enough is enough. This isn't normal, and drove me to the ER. After a number of doctor visits, it was discovered I had coughed so hard for so long I developed 2 giant ulcers on my vocal cords. Ulcers that rubbed against each other every time I coughed, spoke, swallowed. The aunt I saw told me that if I didn't want to permanently damage my vocal cords, I had to cease all talking immediately, and for at least 6 weeks. So, my boss ended up with a doctor's note she couldn't dispute and upper leadership who told her she couldn't fire me, and 6 weeks where she had to cover for me, which she hated. All of which could have been avoided by approving a couple of sick days to let me recover. This is so simple and so goddamned good. As a trucker, I really appreciate this. I hope you give as much grace to your drivers when they tell you they are sick, or otherwise unable to make a deadline given to them, as your boss should have given you. When I was 17, my boss was my narc mom's friend. So when I was really sick, they both ganged up on me and forced me to go to work. I collapsed in the middle of my shift and hit my head. Had to get an ambulance to take me to hospital. Turns out I had a bacterial lung infection and I only had like a 40% breathing capacity. I missed out on all my year 12 exams because I was in hospital struggling to breath. My 80-year-old grandma came to the hospital and tore my mom a new one. It was so bad the nurses called security and they really didn't want to touch the old lady that was half their size, so they asked me who I wanted gone. My grandmother just waved my mom off and I ended up moving in with her after I was released. I miss that crotchety old woman so much. Any manager who insists on their 5 employees calm in while they are sick deserves a big hug. A nice, protracted, cough-filled hug.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.